Hello, my name is Tom Reck. I'm a partner at Withum, and I am involved in the forensic and valuation services group at the firm. I am also quite an active member at the automotive niche within the firm. And I am joined today by Seth Dobbs of the esteemed law firm of Aboyoun Dobbs. So Seth, welcome. Thank you for coming today.
Thank
Maybe
you very much. My pleasure.
No, thank you. Appreciate it. Maybe you could give us a little bit of background on yourself and fill us in on your areas of specialty.
Sure. As you said, I'm a partner of Aboyoun Dobbs. We are a national law firm that has a specialty niche of representing auto dealers and auto groups across the nation. We do a tremendous amount of merger and acquisition work and buy sells in the automotive space. We handle corporate work, franchise work between the franchisee and its franchisors, any type of regulatory compliance work, litigation work from the dealer to a franchisor or the dealer to consumers. Anything that basically touches or relates to a car dealership is our specialty.
Okay, good. Yeah, I mean, our paths have crossed many times over the years, so it's great to do this with you. Thank you.
Sure.
One of the reasons we're here today is because of what's happening with Ford, and it's not just Ford, but you and I have discussed, and I don't think or I do believe it's common knowledge at this point that basically Ford has given dealers options moving forward. And those options are either they don't make any initial additional investment, and they sell only internal combustion engines. They make a $500,000 investment in the Model E certified plan and be limited to selling 25 EVs per year starting 1/1/24. Or they make an investment of upwards of $1.2 million, which is called the Model E Elite program, and that allows them to sell as many vehicles as they'd like. It gives them demo cars and some other benefits, for lack of a better way of putting it. So, Seth, I'm just curious, one of the things that strikes me is our Ford clientele, they've been able to sell EVs for the last couple of years now, and they were not required to make any sort of additional investment in order to be able to sell them. And now they're being asked to make a rather sizable investment to be able to continue to sell EVs. What are your thoughts on this? What do you make of what's happening at Ford?
I think you put it correct. Up until now, dealers have been able to sell every vehicle that Ford's come out with. So if the Mach-E, the Lightning, any other EV car that hit the market was saleable by franchisees. And you have Ford is trying to compartmentalize the EV cars, the commercial vehicles, and the regular combustion engine vehicles. I think that if I had to guess, they're trying to take aim at combating against Tesla and doing this. Um,
Right.
but accurately stated, up until today, any Ford dealer could sell you a Mach-E or a Lightning, and they didn't have to put up $500,000 or $1.2 million or whatever the financial investment may be tomorrow, because at this point we're not 100% sure.
Right. And now it's my understanding, Seth, that within the recent past, Ford essentially bifurcated itself so that you have and when I say Ford, I mean the manufacturer. So Ford basically has a new company that is geared towards selling electric vehicles. Um, and it would seem most of our clientele, any agreements they have with Ford is, I guess you'd say, kind of outdated at this point in terms of it offered them the opportunity to sell internal combustion engines. So was this am I correct in what I'm stating? And was this an intentional decision by Ford to form this new corporation and essentially be able to exclude dealers from being able to sell moving forward?
Yeah, I think that they did this purposely because, as you're aware, there's a significant disparity in bargaining power between a manufacturer and an OEM and a franchisee. And because of that, the various states throughout the country developed these Franchise Practices Act to protect their franchisees against a franchisor. So these acts build into these franchise agreements certain protections for franchisees that are not clearly articulated or articulated at all in the actual franchise agreement. So I believe that what Ford is doing is trying to sidestep these state statutes to get themselves in a position where they can have as close as possible as to a direct-to-consumer sales model, or to be able to control the process much more so than they're controlling it now, where the franchisee is the king of its own domain. Uh, and who knows what that slippery slope will look like going forward into the future.
And you touched upon it earlier. It does seem that there's a bit of a competitive nature in Jim Farley as it relates to Tesla. And it would seem like he's trying to compete directly with Tesla, going the direct to consumer approach. Um, is this something we can expect to see more and more of?
We're not sure. They're really the ones that are testing the market. I think the other OEMs are kind of sitting back to see what happens here, and this is going to be the battle. So depending upon what the outcome of this looks like, it I think is going to have a very significant effect on the industry as a whole. At this point, I think it's too early to tell how this is going to shake out. Um, but it's definitely of great importance to the automotive industry.
And you'll also hear, or I've been hearing quite a bit about this, um, uh, the agency model that's prevalent in Europe, and that's something that's being discussed quite a bit. Are there certain OEMs that are really not interested in going down that road, or is it across the board that everyone is looking to either sell direct or have some sort of agency model in place?
I think you have those OEMs that are um, always looking to buck the trend, and then you have the majority, I think, of the OEMs have processes in place that have developed over uh, significant periods of time that, if it works and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think you're going to see some OEMs very, very slow to change, and then you'll see, I think, a couple like Ford that'll try and push the envelope. But I'd say it's the majority are going to sit back and would be slow to change, depending upon what happens with Ford and some of the other leading OEMs that are trying to push the envelope here.
And when you talk about those trying to push the envelope, are you talking about Rivian, for example, and the was it the Scout? Is it the Scout brand is going to be resurfacing? I understand through Volkswagen. Are those who
Correct.
you're
Yep.
referencing?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and who knows who's around the corner, but those seem to be the ones that are leading the pack at the moment. I think Ford is at the precipice. I think they're the ones that are the torch holder here.
And from your perspective, from a legal perspective, I know that there are a number of states, including Pennsylvania, Virginia, maybe West Virginia, I'm not sure, North Carolina, that have basically said that this Ford program violates their state's franchise laws. Can you discuss like what aspects of the law or would be violated as a result of this?
As I was speaking about before, the states out there have their own Franchise Practices Act that have been developed to protect the franchisees. And those are the statutes that we're speaking about. And I know that the state agencies are looking at things very closely and analyzing the actions by Ford and the other OEMs as to how this would violate the various state statutes that are out there. And each state statute is different and nuanced compared to its neighboring state. But most of the states that have statutes like this have some clause that articulates that actions like this may be tantamount to the taking or the termination of a franchise, or may be considered to be unreasonable standards that are imposed on their dealers, or unreasonable requirements and upgrades that would violate the state statutes. So it's definitely being viewed closely by the associations across the country, and the dealer body in general is looking to see how these actions may or may not violate their franchise agreement, as that franchise agreement is defined by their individual state statute.
And if a dealer, and I mean, look, let's face it, $1.2 million plus is a large investment for any dealer. If a dealer can't afford that $1.2 million, what happens to them at that point? Are they effectively going to be forced out by Ford?
I think you're going to have a schism between your larger dealers that have sufficient capital to go ahead and build the chargers or invest the $1.2 million, and then you have your dealers that can't. And what's going to happen is that those dealers that can't pay to be a participant in the certified elite program or the certified program, that slowly but surely they're going to not have electric cars to sell. And who knows what that's going to do to them in the future. I mean, if right now they're able to sell a Mach-E, they're able to sell a Lightning, but tomorrow or the next year or the year after that, they may be only able to sell internal combustion engines. And if the market keeps moving the way that people say that the market's going to go, it may leave them with very little cars to sell, and the consumers may be looking for vehicles that they don't have sitting on their lot.
And it raises an interesting question, going back to the concept of Ford setting up a different entity to sell the electric vehicles. If you are unable to make that $1.2 million investment, are you owed anything by Ford, or is Ford simply going to say, no harm, no foul, you can still continue to sell internal combustion engines? The fact that you opted not to get into this new venture, that's your decision. I mean, have the dealers basically been isolated, or are they going to be isolated based on an agreement that they may have signed 30, 40 years ago?
Well, what may end up happening is these dealers may have to look at their state statutes to see if, in fact, their franchise agreement is being terminated. And if it's being terminated, they need to look to see what would happen to me in that instance. Would Ford be required to purchase my franchise from me and give me the estimated franchise value of my dealership, buy back my parts, buy back my vehicles that are sitting on the ground? um, and what would happen to all the future value that my dealership would have? What about these dealers that have been around for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, some, that their dynasty is going to come to a screeching halt because they don't have the liquidity to put up $1.2 million to put forward-facing chargers. I mean, these are very serious questions that the dealers need to look in the mirror and say, we need to deal with this.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, you'd have to then look very carefully at what your individual, well, I assume there's commonality, or there is commonality to the franchise agreements, but what does that look like? To your point, is it a matter of we'll buy back your inventory, or is there something in the agreement that actually defines what the value of the franchise is? Meaning, does it capture future cash flows? The salaries and any other benefits that would inure to an owner after that point in time. Is that part and parcel of what the would be part of the agreement in terms of a buyout by Ford? And I would tend to think not, but I could be wrong.
I think that it's going to come down to an evaluation of what is actually articulated in the boilerplate franchise agreement that was provided to the dealer by the factory, and then how that is perhaps supplemented by the state statutes that add language into those franchise agreements in an attempt to try and protect the franchisees. And that's done through legislation basically. So it's
Right,
going to come down to an individualized analysis on a state by state basis, depending upon those two factors.
right. And now New Jersey requires a return on investment of 10 years, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So if the manufacturer was to force you to have a facility upgrade, the dealer is to expect a reasonable return on investment, and the dealer is to be able to pay for that upgrade over the profits generated over a 10-year period. And if not, then the manufacturer cannot force the dealer to make such upgrades.
And we see all the time dealers are required to make these upgrades every so many years. So now they're being potentially required to invest an additional $1.2 million. That's just Ford. I'm curious, are you seeing, are you seeing any other automobile manufacturers requiring significant upgrades and then potentially talking about changing platform, et cetera?
I think it comes down to the definition of significant.
Okay,
There are definitely most manufacturers have EV requirements for their franchisees. You see it a
right.
lot in buy sells, where the manufacturer gives a letter of conditional approval to the buyer and
Hmm.
says that part of the conditions of which you're going to be approved on is you need to put X amount of heavy duty lifts, a you know 40, $50,000 forklift to pick up a vehicle that has a 10,000-pound battery in it. You need a forward-facing charger in the front of the dealership. There are EV requirements that are now being put on all franchisees, or many franchisees, I should say. Um, and it comes down to, I guess, the definition of significant. I don't know of any other manufacturer that's requiring quite what Ford is requiring,
Right.
but that's today. I mean, we don't know what tomorrow may bring. I think GM's initial outlay program was the 50 to $150,000 investment, which is a far cry from 1.2 million. But again, I think that it's going to depend on, is anybody going to fight Ford on these things? Is Ford going to get their franchisees to all pay the 1.2, and next year or the year after it's going to be to 1.5 or 2.5. It's a slippery slope, and again, I think everyone's just watching the landscape carefully because we don't know what the future is going to bring.
And in terms of the outlay, I mean, I'm hearing stories from dealers that they've reached out to their electric companies and said, if we were to put in the in these chargers, when would you be able to help us set this up? And I'm hearing, 3, 4 years down the road, basically, because of supply chain issues and the capacity at which our power grid is, you know, that it currently operates. What are you hearing in that regard?
I'm hearing the same thing, and that is very geographic dependent. You have
Yeah,
some dealerships that are in markets that have some infrastructure to support the type of EV advancement that the OEMs are looking for, and you have some that absolutely do not. And as much as the manufacturer wants to push the franchisee to fall in line and put these EV facility upgrades in place, the reality is that some of these geographic regions simply it's an impossibility. And you're
right.
talking years and years before the infrastructure is available to put in the level of chargers that the OEMs would like. So then you have zoning regulations, then you have municipal meetings and hearings that need to take place to try and get the approvals necessary to put some of this stuff in. It's not simply a matter of paying a check to a manufacturer, having the chargers dropped off on the dealership parking lot, and it just working. There's a lot that has to go into getting these dealerships to the point where the manufacturers want them. And the timeframes that are being imposed on these dealers are very, very difficult to achieve.
And it raises a question as to if you were to move ahead and say, okay, I'll be an elite dealer, I'll make that investment, but you can't make that investment for reasons beyond your control for 2, 3 years down the road. Are you still allowed to sell EVs?
It's a great question. I don't think anybody knows.
Interesting. And when it comes to the way dealers are potentially looking to sell cars, I know one of the concerns that dealers have is this idea of, over-the-air updates that are, that can be facilitated by the manufacturer directly, and just simply as a result of the reduction in the number of parts between internal combustion engines and electric vehicles, what happens to um, you know, their service revenue moving forward? Any thoughts on that? Do you think that dealerships will be compensated in some way, shape, or form for things like over-the-air updates, things of that nature?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure about how the over-the-air updates play in. I do know that it's happening now, but I think you have a more important point in your statement is that what's going to happen to the substantial service facilities that the OEMs required dealers to
Right.
put up over the past decade or so. The dealerships that have been erected over the past 10 years have grown significantly in their service departments. I mean, you have some dealers that have 20, 30, 40, 50 bays that were a requirement of the manufacturer, and now the EV vehicles may not require the level of service that internal combustion engines did. And what's going to happen to these service facilities that these dealers were forced to invest in? I think it goes
Right.
back to the return on investment question we had before is, are these dealers who may be in the middle of the 10-year period, are they going to be able to pay for these substantial renovations that the manufacturer forced them to put up within 10 years? If the shift is going to be from internal combustion to EV, and the level of service is going to dramatically decrease.
Yeah, and then look, that's a significant component of the revenue of any dealership. Um, well, there's certainly a lot of questions that we're dealing with as a result of this change, and it would seem that within the next, I don't know, 10 years, there's the potential for a significant amount of obsolescence on the balance sheet of many dealerships based on current trends. Is that fair?
Sure, I think so. Yeah, I mean, if you have a dealer that's been loading up on parts because they have a very active service department, they're going to need to closely monitor their parts levels. They're going to have to monitor a lot of things to make sure that they're not carrying something that they may get stuck with, or
Right.
that just grows obsolete while on the shelf. Sure.
Yeah. Let me ask you this: where do you see, um, Ford dealers in general in terms of transactions? I mean, I continue to read that a lot of dealers are still very bullish. That they're 50% say that they're going to buy a dealership in the next year or so, and I don't know if I believe that with everything that's going on, but that's that's what people are saying. I'm just curious, what do you feel is the sentiment, or what is the sentiment of some of your clients? Are they bullish? Are they bearish? Are they concerned but still optimistic? What's the feel?
I think concerned but optimistic. I think that there's still a tremendous amount of activity. We're still coming off of COVID, where there was a flurry of buy-sell activity across the country. I think there's still people that were unable to buy deals during that period because of availability of inventory of dealerships that are still
Mhm.
hunting dealerships down. And I think it's going to take a while for that demand to trickle out. Um, but from the deals that I've seen, everybody is watching things closely, but I'd say people are still out there looking and hunting for deals, Ford included. I haven't seen anybody walk away from a Ford deal because of what's happening, but they're walking into it with their eyes open, knowing what is happening on the landscape.
Right. Right. Okay. Um, so I guess to kind of wrap up, I'm not even sure how long we've been talking now. I've kind of lost track of time. Um, you know, the profitability of Ford dealerships would seem to be negatively impacted moving forward, even if for no other reason than the legal fees associated, or the potential legal fees associated with any sort of um, uh, dealings with Ford moving forward. Um, but are you seeing multiples come down in terms of Ford dealerships or any other dealerships?
It's interesting because Ford is one of the brands that never yielded a super high multiple.
Mhm.
In the industry. So that's probably working to Ford's benefit at the moment. I haven't really seen the multiples dropping for Ford. Again, people
Okay.
are going into these transactions optimistically but cautiously. And this is relatively new. I mean, these announcements from Farley, we're not talking about a year ago. I mean, these are very recent. And so again, people are going in with their eyes open, but they're cautious. I haven't seen the multiples change too much, and I do still see there's still a demand for Ford dealerships.
And one of the things I've heard from dealerships in general, and specifically Ford, is if the political climate changes, by different parties gaining control of the Senate and the House or presidency, however you want to look at it,
Right.
does some of this Green New Deal go away? That's
I,
certainly something that's been discussed. The other is, when you look at Ford's stock price going back 5 years to where it is today, it really hasn't changed all that much. Is Farley secure in his job? So that, and I think there's a sentiment that by dealers anyway, that Ford's not going to be able to produce electric vehicles on any sort of regular basis for quite some time. So when you couple all of those three things together, or those three specific things, and God knows how many others, it goes to your point. People have their eyes open, but I'm not seeing any sort of the sky is falling mentality by any dealers at this stage. Care to
I,
care to add to
I,
that?
I, sure, I agree entirely, and I think those are very valid points. I think people are looking at the political climate to see how strong the push is going to continue to be for EV, if it's going to take a slower pace than perhaps what we've seen over the past few years.
Hmm.
Um, so there's just a lot of things that are in play that I think people are looking at carefully. And you're absolutely right. If something were to change and perhaps Farley were no longer at the forefront of Ford's movement, and there's a change in the political climate, who knows? Who knows what Ford may continue to do? Maybe they about face, maybe they slow things down. Um, it's definitely in a state of flux.
And I've not heard of any lawsuits yet by any specific dealers against Ford. I know that, there's trade associations that obviously are very concerned about it. Um, but I'm not aware of any lawsuits. Are you aware of any, if you can say at this juncture?
I'm not aware of any filed suits as of yet. I do know the trade associations across the nation are looking at things carefully, looking at how a potential lawsuit would even be framed. Would it be a trade association filing on behalf of its dealer body? Would it be the dealers themselves joining together? Would it be the individual dealers joining together?
Right.
Um, so I'm not aware of any filed suits at the moment, but I do know that there are mutterings across the country of what to do about the situation.
And and one last question would be in terms of the dealerships that you're working for, that you represent, what are you having them do in terms of the near, quickly approaching December 2nd deadline in terms of, what package should they sign on for, and is there anything else they should do as a result of signing on?
We represent many Ford dealers across the country, and most of them are going to be in the elite program. It's their choice. They feel that that's what they need to do, but they're doing it cautiously, and they have prepared reservation of rights letters to Fords, basically
Right.
saying we feel that we're constrained. Uh, we must we must elect to be a model elite dealer, but we want Ford to know that we're not waiving our rights.
And in terms of potential lawsuits, and from a slightly different perspective, meaning that if someone doesn't make an investment and they're essentially losing their franchise, what are the things that they should be doing now to help bolster their claim for damages down the road if and when it ultimately comes to that?
Well, they definitely should be seeking counsel at this moment to make sure that their ducks are in a row and that they're preparing themselves appropriately. Documentation is going to be key. Communications with the factory should be in writing. A lot of the times you have phone calls or text messages. You'd prefer to have emails or something to look back on to establish the path as to how you got to where you are. You should be keeping track of potential losses, keeping track of damages, keeping track of the vehicles that you're selling, the vehicles that you may not be able to sell going forward if there's
Mhm.
decreases there, um, documenting your service levels if there's a downtick in that. Um, the more documentation, the better to support the claims that the dealers may need to make in the future.
Yeah, and obviously a clean set of books is tantamount at that stage. I mean, clearly,
Sure.
yeah, interesting. Well, that's all that I really wanted to cover today. Is there anything else that we should be thinking about? When I say we, I mean either as dealers or as professionals working with dealers, or anything that you think we should keep our eye on, or any trends or anything that are concerning to you?
I think it just goes to show that the dealers, they need to be cognizant of what their manufacturers are doing, and the actions that a manufacturer may or may not be taking may not be in the best interest of the franchisee.
Yeah,
You need to put yourself first, and you need to have your eyes open, going forward, and to make sure that you're not just taking for granted that the actions of the manufacturer are going to be for your benefit, because we don't know what the future may look like. And this is your livelihood. These are businesses that you have built. Some have built over generations,
yeah,
um, and there are some very important battles coming up.
interesting. All right. Well, listen, I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much. I found this to be very interesting, and I'm sure our clientele will as well. Thank you so much.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. It was a great discussion, and uh, look forward to continuing to work to side by side going forward in the future.
Yeah, let's do this again. Hopefully we have better news in 6 months from now or a year from now.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care. Bye bye.
Be well.